Hello, I am Casey Turner from Express Your Artsy Soul, and I'm so glad to be participating with Meg Journals for Junk Journal January. This has a special place in my heart as it was the first challenge that I participated in as a student when I was very new to art journaling in 2021. So I'm thrilled that now for 2025, I am I'm one of the artists. So my prompt is opaque, and I absolutely love acrylic paint. It is one of my favorite mediums to use in my art journaling process. So we are going to be talking about opaque. But first, I chose just a junk journal that I created, and I put down clear gesso first on my vintage pages so that they could hold up to whatever medium I'm going to put on them. So I made sure that was on there and was dry. And then now I am just adding some collage papers with Mod Podge and my signature gross Mod Podge brush. I call my Mod Podge brushes gross brushes, so I really should get myself a shirt that says gross brush. But then people would think I was weird, which might be true. But anyway, sorry, bunny trail. So I always like to add some collage papers on my pages, regardless of whether they are plain, like, solid white, or whether they are vintage papers. I just like tearing paper and gluing it down as my first warm-up layer. So I'm doing that here with just a couple of pieces. And then I grabbed a piece of tracing paper that I clearly was practicing drawing roses on, and I grabbed some cheap craft paint that is pretty transparent. The cheaper the paint, probably the more transparent it's going to be. But I decided I was going to mess around with this idea of adding black gesso that I just dropped in my green paint to some like cheap craft paint, and just to see what that was like. Obviously, anytime you add black to a color, you will change the hue of that color, and that's okay. But here I'm showing you what it's like to just add that craft paint, that craft acrylic, just by itself, and how transparent it is. I apologize for my dog if you hear him barking. So I'm showing you with that green and that blue how transparent it is just with that cheap craft paint. Then I went in and I'm adding too much black gesso, to be quite honest with you, because I didn't want it that dark, but I was winging it at this point. So I just went in and added that black gesso with the green paint, and that makes that green paint opaque. Obviously, I completely changed the color, yes. And I will go in here in a minute and add some more of that green. So I did add too much. All you need is a little bit of black to make that green a darker hue, which I like, but I went a little heavy with the black gesso. But anytime you add gesso, like black gesso or white gesso, to acrylic paint, that will make that paint more opaque. Anytime you are working with white gesso, like just as a whole, instead of white paint will be more transparent, whereas white gesso is more opaque. So the more white gesso you add, the more opaque it will be, and you won't be able to see behind it. I hope I'm making sense. Also, I apologize for the glare from my light on that wet acrylic paint. I did not realize that until after the fact, so my apologies. I did go ahead and add some of that black gesso to the blue, to the cheap blue craft paint. I really like that color blue, but I just wanted to make that craft paint more opaque so that I wasn't seeing the text behind it. And that really is kind of like the purpose here, I guess, is to show you how you can make transparent paints that you have opaque by adding gesso. What would life be without pink? I mean, come on, especially neon pink. So here I am adding some neon pink, and I'm going to change that hue to a darker, obviously, by adding some black gesso again, just to make that neon pink more opaque. So I'm not seeing all the book text behind it. Sometimes I like to see the old book text or ledger paper or whatever it is behind whatever medium I'm using, behind the acrylic paint. And honestly, the heavier you go with acrylic paint, you can get it to be more opaque. But, this is a different alternative, right? I just kind of wanted to do something maybe a little bit outside the box, and, maybe it's a little bit more common or known to add white gesso to acrylic paint to make it opaque. Obviously, you'll be making it lighter, but I thought, hey, why not add some black gesso? What would that be like? What if we tried that? And I love that about art journaling, and just the messiness and the freedom of it, that we can sit here and ask, like, hey, what if we try this? And it's just in a journal. It's not on a canvas that we feel pressure like we might ruin. Like, clearly, when I was working on these pages, I was feeling a bit messy because this, is not really my typical style of creating. But I was in a messy mood, I guess. Now here I am going to add some white gesso because it just needed it. It's looking a little muddy. It's kind of looking like my 5-year-old was in here in my art room just smearing some paint around at this point, but that's okay. So you can see that with that white gesso, how opaque it is, that it literally took away, or maybe I should say covered up, that text on the pages. It totally covered up that text because white gesso is pretty opaque. And then mixing it in with some of that wet acrylic that I already had there, that really, it again covers up whatever is behind it. I wanted to just smear in some of that that pink color, and I don't know, I was just going a little bit crazy. And baby wipes, that's what I'm using here to wipe away. Baby wipes are fantastic, and you'll see here in a minute that I decided, while my acrylic paint was still wet, I wanted to grab a stencil and that baby wipe and pull away some of the opacity of the acrylic paint. So you have that print of the stencil now left behind. So I pulled away some of the acrylic paint. And I mean, always, always, always clean your stencils on a scrap piece of paper, because then you have some amazing collage paper. Like, hello, already ready for me to go? Like, no, ready to go for me? I don't know. Just ignore me. I'm rambling. And I decided to take my my paintbrush in the wet paint and the wet white gesso, the back of my paintbrush, and scrape into it. And I'm removing, where I'm scraping in, I'm removing that paint so that I can see behind it. So I'm like taking away some of the opacity that I just put down. And I just kind of wanted to scratch into this with the back of my paintbrush, make some botanical marks. And so you have this thick acrylic paint, you have all this opaque, acrylic and color, but then you just have these cool marks that you are seeing the original pages underneath. I didn't really like that gray area up at the top there, so I took some more white gesso, and if you notice, I'm just like rolling my brush in my fingers kind of and rolling it on the paper for just some kind of variation in marks and not really just smearing it or brushing it on like a normal paintbrush. I decided to add some white gesso rather than black to some of that blue acrylic, the just cheap transparent blue craft paint, and added a little bit of green just to get some color variation. And I'm going in with another stencil. These are stencils from Creative Worship Stamps. I'm going in with another stencil and just brushing that on there. The color isn't like, it's not coming out super well, but you know, you can see it there. So here are my messy finished pages all about Opaque and my love of acrylic paint. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoy the month.